Hello and Merry Christmas. Um, wow, 2020. It has definitely it really done something weird. It not only flew by, but it also feels like it took a long time to get through this year. Definitely an odd feeling overall to think that here we are. It's Christmas time. First and foremost, Merry Christmas to you and your family. Um, I know that this past year has been full of challenges for everyone. Uh, the shared collective challenges that we've all faced, in combination with all the personal challenges that I know that everyone has and has dealt with the best that they can. Um, I wanted to take a minute to not only wish you a Merry Christmas and to extend my heartfelt gratitude to you for the past year, for the trust that you've placed in me, for really being an important and a critically important part of my life. If you're watching this, there's a reason that I sent this to you. You are very important to me, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. Um, and one of the best things that I can do, at least in a professional position, is to try to give back to you whenever I can. And right now, I felt this would be a great time to reach out and offer you not only just a quick glimpse, a look back at the past year, and some of the lessons maybe that we've learned from 2020, but most importantly, let's take a look out the windshield of the car. Let's take a look at the road ahead, and I'll offer some thoughts and some considerations for you to keep in mind as we um, approach the new year in 2021. Some of the things that I'm going to be looking for, maybe some positive opportunities that are going to potentially exist, but also, of course, let's talk about some of the headwinds and the potential risks that I see on the front line. Um, to do so, what I'm going to do in the first, 3 or 4 minutes from this point forward, I'm just going to do a quick recap, and then I'm going to go into some further details. So at the least, hang with me until maybe about the 5 or 10 minute mark, because that's where I'm just going to kind of summarize things. From that point forward, I'll go into a little bit more detail. Um, but in terms of 2020, let's just kind of walk ourselves back to January. We got the first step of a trade deal with China. Most people didn't even know that happened. Was it a formal trade deal? That's still to be debated. But the Trump administration and Beijing came to the table. They supposedly made some agreements, most of which have not been fulfilled yet. Perhaps it's because of the coronavirus. Perhaps it's because these things were lip service. But the truth of the matter is that the trade concerns with China are not only still very much on the table, but because of how the various participants in this global economy have reacted to everything that came from February on with coronavirus, um, the trade concerns are very much present and I would say escalated. That doesn't seem to be focused on much in mainstream financial news media. There's plenty of conversations about debt and deficit and the spending bill and the relief packages and everything else, but no one really wants to talk about the fact that while the United States constantly has been dealing with government imposed shutdowns, suspensions of business activity, combined with the private sector discontinuity of business because of either supply chain concerns or employee concerns or whatever it is. The fact of the matter is that the U.S. economy is not running on full steam. It is not doing what little production we truly do. Yet we are getting dollars inserted into our pockets as a collective country, dollars of which we can talk about the origins at another time, but these dollars, generally speaking, are not being spent in the U.S. They're not being spent to afford Americans continued benefits of income and businesses the benefit of revenue. More often than not, they're being spent internationally, in a lot of cases in China. So the trade concerns are definitely still on the table. But if we fast forward past the coronavirus concerns, I'm not going to go into all the details about the terrible ill effects that come with these government imposed shutdowns and the risk reward imbalance that has been simply the caution is thrown to the wind, and it's been a matter of there must be this one singular reward, regardless of all the other inherent risks that are taken on. That is something that should be concerning, but there's this magic wand that the federal government, at least in an indirect fashion, has been able to wave, and that is by way of the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve in concert with the Treasury. Um, Without belaboring all of those topics, because those are ones I could probably, talk you into a coma on. The reality is that we have definitely used debt to our perceived advantage. The past year has required significant debt spending to afford or to pay for some of the policy decisions that are being made both at a federal and state level. And there's going to be continued disruption around those conversations, a lot of that being the congressional discussions of spending bills, relief packages, all of that. That's not going to go away. That is going to continue. It was maybe 2012 to, let's say, 2018 or so. The real big topic in Congress was debt ceiling. That was always a big one. And I guess maybe it was 2016 where that was no, it was 2018, excuse me, where it was infinitely suspended. That was really the cultural zeitgeist in Congress or in Washington was, while all the other surface level affairs were going on, there was always this looming shadow of debt ceiling that would always come around, and government shutdowns and furlough and blah, 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 blah. Okay, that has been replaced now with the debt and deficit spending in concert with the Federal Reserve's policy decisions. Why that should matter to you is that is going to be what you're going to be fed for the next year. I can almost promise you. What we saw in terms of the decision making is a direct consequence of, let's call it, a crash test dummy scenario that played out in 2007 through 2009 and forward. The Fed, by no accident, had used the environment that was created in 2007 and 8 by way of criminal banking acts. There's no secret about that any longer. We really cannot ignore that. But they used that opportunity to beta test some policies that had been cooking in the kitchen, if you will, for many, many years, pre-Greenspan. And we can really go back to the Volcker era in the early days of the first Reagan administration, where Paul Volcker, who was more of a Carter, he was a Carter-appointed Fed chair. Ronald Reagan worked collectively with him and Reagan's administration to what they call broke the back of inflation. That's where we ended up seeing this massive overnight lending rate hike, or the federal funds, the Federal Reserve rate. It spiked overnight, basically, to battle the hyperinflation that came as a result of the petrodollar crisis, the oil embargo, the oil crisis of the late 70s. Okay, let's leave all that in history where it belongs, but there's a lot of good information that can come from that. It matters to you, though, because that's going to be front and center. Here's what I'm going to suggest to you. A, don't let that be the one thing you focus on. Everything having to do with the Fed and Federal Reserve decision-making, again, in concert with Congress and the Treasury, because the Fed is not a governmental institution. Technically, it's private. More on that another day. But what I want you to instead focus on or realize is that those decisions are long lag types of decisions. Righting that ship is going to take a long time, and the effects of it are not going to be seen immediately. What will be seen immediately are three big hitters. One, we're going to end up seeing the reversion to normalcy, because the overspending for stimulation purposes will have to reach an end, and it's most likely going to be in 2021. So a lot of what the market's done over the past year has really been a consequence or result of the Fed's eagerness to support or prop up the market. Point number two is going to be the fact that we do have a new administration coming in, regardless of what happens in Georgia with the Senate runoff. There's going to be policy changes, and there's probably, and I say that with a high degree of confidence, a shift from the Trump administration's focus on deregulation, which effectively promotes, it's a pro-business attitude, to over-regulation, which is typically a pro-government policy-making initiative. There are decisions that can be made without Congress, so the Senate does not matter as much. Point number three, though, is going to be the potential consequences of the regulation. So it's not only a pro-government move to increase regulation and regulatory involvement by DC, but there's the secondary and tertiary consequences that come from that. The private sector making certain decisions either now because of a short window of time before they know that there's at least a new administration coming in, or more likely than not, the decisions that they're pushing off because doing them now will have less of a benefit as if they were to do them in a different environment. So that's the quick summary. Focus much less on the overall kind of Fed or Federal Reserve's decision-making processes because that's going to be shoved in your throat. Focus much more on watching where regulation occurs in Congress and in Washington, because that will directly impact markets. It will directly impact the economy now. Okay, let's go into a little more detail. Why does that matter? Why is that significant for you? Well, first and foremost, when it comes to the Fed and the Federal Reserve, they really only control the shortest term, the overnight lending window for banks. That matters very little to you. You're not a bank. You don't borrow from them. However, the Fed did open 2 years ago a lending window that they activated in the past year to where they'll actually lend to small businesses. And that's, again, little known fact. That's one of those weird, peculiar things that happened where I'm a free market believer. I believe that free markets have a tendency to right themselves. They tend to be the scales that always find themselves level. Once you impose some type of force or action on a free market, preventing it from being able to find level, it may be more altruistic, it may be more humanitarian to involve yourself. However, by disrupting the balance of the scales, what you've effectively done is you do risk actually making it so that the scales can't find level once again. You may, let's say, put too much weight on one side and it bends the scale or something to that effect. When it comes to lending, if in a traditional marketplace, the idea of lending money in general, whether it be by buying a bond as an investor or lending to your cousin Larry who wants to open up some kind of business, the idea is you're evaluating what the likelihood or probability of getting paid back is. All right. If I'm a bank and I'm a for-profit bank, a bank that's in the business of keeping people's money, which then allows me to lend it out to other people, and then I can capture a coupon or a rate of interest on that. I'm here to try to make a profit, but I also can't risk not getting paid back. So if there's businesses out there who want to borrow money, and they've got two options. They've got a business who can't risk not getting paid back, or they have a Federal Reserve, who will actually lend them money directly, who has the ability to effectively kind of print money. Yet this business needs to make a profit. They need to evaluate risk. They need to make sure that I can pay them back. This one really has no inherent disincentive to not lend money. Imagine where I, as the business owner, go, right? Maybe my business isn't likely to do well. But more importantly, you don't have a free market where the bank can actually assess the validity of that company and say, look, it's a judgment call, but the reality is that, selling, I don't know, shoes made from, wood harvested from the forests of, Madagascar. I don't know. I'm totally going off the cuff here, but the hard reality is maybe these things, they're not even a comfortable shoe, but the lender is going, this is just not a viable business plan. You're never going to pay us back. There's no way you can make money on this. Now it's up to the business owner to say, okay, I need to either have a better sales pitch or I need to go find a different lender. So they go to the free market. That's what happens. Chances are they won't get the loan because chances are it's not a good business. They may believe it is, but it's probably not. However, introduce the Fed. Now the Fed comes in and lends them money. Now what happens? Well, now a bad business is allowed to operate, and they probably won't pay it back. So then what happens? Nothing, except now we have additional debt that is rolling up. We have, and if it's not even debt, because again, the way the Fed works versus the way the government spends, let's separate those two out a little bit. But for the sake of simplicity of conversation today, why it matters is maybe it's not even debt, but it's still inflationary because the Fed introduced cash to the marketplace by lending this money that they did not get paid back. So now there's a hyper supply of money that's injected into the market. And the old saying, of the way that a good way to look at inflation is if you have gold, which has a finite amount in the world, but if somebody magically does figure out alchemy and has the Midas touch, whatever it is, where they can turn other metals into gold or other things into gold, they can transmutate, right? All of a sudden you have this abundant supply of gold. Gold all of a sudden isn't really that valuable anymore because there's so much of it. Okay, the same goes with any other type of currency, money, anything really. The more abundant it becomes, the cheaper it is. The more worthless or the less worth it has. Okay, so you can see where there's some inherent issues there. But again, talking about you, how does the Fed's rate affect you? It really doesn't. It affects banks. Directly, the Fed's policy never hits you square in the nose. It doesn't affect you immediately. It doesn't affect markets immediately. Speculation on future action affects markets immediately. That's where I bring back the conversation of focus much more on regulation, policy, and procedural measures coming out of Congress that will hamper the ability for small businesses to actually do better. Now, this is the warning shot, right? What is 2021 going to have in store? Well, if the Senate race goes as Republicans would like, and they keep the Senate, that's right now the most probable best bet scenario for not only the long term, but the medium term. There's probably a little short-term risk there, but that's probably going to be the best outcome. And if we look at it from constitutional America, that is the best outcome. The whole reason that our government was designed the way that it is so that our government doesn't get anything done, because that means that they can't grow, and that means that they can't impose themselves on the private sector, the individual, etc. Unfortunately, over time, we've manipulated our own system in such a way that we really do disregard the Constitution in so many ways, and instead we focus on what we want the country to be, not what it was intended to be or built to be. You can argue that on both sides. I have my side, but I won't belabor that point. What I will then discuss, though, is Trump's administration. A lot of stupid decisions were made. A lot of really bad interpersonal affairs occurred. Everything from Scaramucci to Bolton to all these other things. Okay, ignore those. That's your drama that comes out of your stupid reality shows. Okay, that is not relevant. What is relevant? And you can't just simply crown him as though he's the greatest president ever, because he was not. But the one thing you have to credit Trump for doing is they cut a lot of regulation very quickly when they got into office. That is what helped businesses really bloom and blossom. And cutting regulations, not just the tax deal that was made at the end of 2017, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. It was cutting regulations on a number of other business procedures, whether it was EPA regulations, which did not result in this exorbitant amount of black clouds and death, global warming immediately as though you were told. Now, may companies eventually go down the wrong road? Maybe, but more often than not, they're actually doing the right thing. Private sector entities typically do the right thing, because if it's sniffed out that they're doing something fishy or wrong, they have to put so much time and resource into covering it up that it becomes very inefficient, or they get found out and then people don't want to do anything with them anymore. I mean, look at Johnson & Johnson with their baby powder, right? They didn't even know, maybe not, I don't know, that their baby powder was causing cancer, but let's assume that they didn't know. They got thrown to the wolves. But let's assume they did know. They got thrown to the wolves. The market tends to find it's right. Um, as far as the regulation environment, though, goes, we've got a president, vice president, and a House of Representatives that is very fond of themselves. They believe that the government has an important role to play in your life uh, each and every day. And I'm not saying that the Republicans are any different. They want to be in your life just in a very different way. They want to, well, we can look at the Patriot Act and see just how much they want to be in your life. But they want to be in your life in terms of telling businesses how businesses should be run, how they should operate, what is okay and what's not okay, rather than letting the free market decide. That matters because you're going to see some policy decisions that are put into place that will hamper businesses. It will cause it to be more expensive to do business, which in turn, more often than not, typically benefits one party and one party alone, and that is the largest businesses. Maybe you love the really big companies, but I tend to root for the small guy who's ready to work his butt off and can't rest on their laurels, et cetera, et cetera. That becomes much harder to do in a high regulatory environment. I work in one. My environment is so regulated, and we just get more and more regulations coming through. Some of us are actually doing the right thing because we care. There are some bad practitioners out there. I'm not going to pretend there's not. But adding additional regulation means that I, who likes to do things by the books, who chooses to do things correctly, means I have to do that much more to do it correctly. Whereas the scammers and the scumbags and the con artists who didn't follow rules to begin with, do you think they're racing to go follow those rules now? If you add more of them, they're going to keep scamming and scumbagging. But eventually, maybe they'll get found out, maybe they won't. But these extensive regulations, all they do is put additional pressure on the best businesses, the ones who do it by the books, who do it the right way. Now, let's bring in taxes, okay? If the Senate runoff goes in favor of the Democratic ticket, that is the worst case scenario, mid, long, and short term. And here's why. So again, if the Republicans win in Georgia, which, you know, whether you like the people or not, the fact that there's a chance that nothing will get done in Washington is a good thing. It's good because businesses can continue to operate thinking, not a lot's going to change, so I can move forward. If a lot's going to change, they're going to stop right in their tracks and they're going to start assessing what's going to change and what changes do I need to make. That just means they can't go about doing their business. Okay? If the Senate runoff results in a Democratic win, now you've got the Triple Crown, and we can see Triple Crowns work in both sides. You get a lot of big changes that happen, like we saw again in the first couple of years of Trump's administration. They got a lot of regulations cut. You get a Triple Crown, the regulation impulse is going to be even greater than it will be if they don't win. Okay. That's then going to be complemented by what is most likely to be one of the most radical overhauls of the tax code that we in this collective, those who are living today, that we're ever familiar with. And the reason that it's going to be so radical is it's not just going to touch the income world. It's going to focus on hitting all three of the big targets. It's going to hit on the income or the revenue world. It's going to hit on the estate world, meaning passing money from one generation to the next. And it's going to hit on the qualified plan world or the 401k world, which is the dominant means by which any and every American not only saves, but invests. Okay. So hitting all three of those in one fell swoop, we didn't see any changes to the qualified plan world with the Trump Tax Cut and Job Act. We ended up seeing some growth or expansion of the estate tax exemption. So there was a hit there in a positive way, a benefit. And there was, of course, the income / revenue world where corporate, income tax was reduced. The individual exemption, personal exemption was increased. When we talk about this Biden plan, and I'm going to do a special breakdown of it once we get through the Senate race, just so that I don't prematurely bring it all to table and create unnecessary fears, but we're going to have to pay very close attention to that because it's not going to be what you hear about on the surface. What is currently in the projected plan, there are some serious devils in the details that will affect every single person, and it will affect businesses. So businesses right now are still scrambling. Think about all the restaurant owners who want to cook food for others that cannot do so. Think of all the sporting goods stores that aren't selling kids cleats because the children aren't allowed to go and play their sports. Think of all the, you can just go on and on and on. Okay, good, bad, or indifferent. Maybe this is all for great. Maybe this is the only way to get through this living disaster that we are currently facing. I would say it's not, but if it is, they're already dealing with these things. Now introduce some serious changes to the corporate tax environment, some serious changes to the way that people save in their qualified plans or their 401k plans, and serious changes to the way that qualified plan sponsors, the businesses that are offering them, now all of a sudden they're not going to have the same potential benefits. So now they're going to have an expense to bring in a new third-party administrator to their plan. They're going to have the time to sit down and understand, what does this plan change mean? Which the entire time the business owner, let's say it's not a publicly traded company, it's private. The business owner has had this plan in place where they can take a lot of their income and save it for their own retirement. Now they're all of a sudden pressed with, I can't save as much. I had this retirement plan in place where I was saving X amount every year, tax deferred, and now I can't do that anymore. Maybe they're the most kind-hearted, altruistic person who says, I'm going to keep paying my employees exactly what I am, and I'm going to cover the difference for them, and then I'll just take all the cuts out of my own pocket. But that really wouldn't be good business operation. Now, maybe they don't give themselves a raise, but they're more often than not going to try to cover their own personal self, because that's why they took the risk of opening a business. That's why they run a business. Those people are now all of a sudden going to be really reevaluating, well, how much can I put aside for myself? How much can the business afford to put aside for others? Can we pay them the same salary? And this is all while they're focusing on this affair, not doing their business, producing their product, creating the widget, the service, the whatever. Okay. So this coming year has the high potential to be very volatile, because if these types of things go into place, again, following a Georgia runoff that results in a Senate win for the Democrats, every business owner and small business in this country is all of a sudden going to slam on the brakes and go, I know we're hurting. Everybody here's already hurting. I get that. But we really have to evaluate all these changes that are going to be coming down the pipeline and get in front of them, because they will take us out if we don't. That should be concerning, because that's also going to impact the way that we invest. Small and mid-cap investments have done exceedingly well towards the end of this year because they're very nimble, they're mobile, they've been able to recover quickly, they can make quick, fast decisions when they've been shut down and they had to fire or lay off some people. They can go and pick up some new employees, whatever it is. They can move kind of quick, but those are the ones that also get hurt the most when new regulations come in. So as we go into the next year, there's a high probability that those companies are going to see some pain. Large caps will probably still do well. But if nobody's buying their product, if nobody can afford to do what they're doing, to take in their widget or whatever the big company is, I mean, maybe Facebook will benefit because there's more people who can lollygag and dilly-dally on Facebook. I don't know. But at the end of the day, Facebook makes a lot of their revenues on advertising for other companies. Other companies may not be able to advertise because they don't have those advertising dollars, because they're pushing those resources towards addressing some of these big regulatory changes. All of that, though, is unlikely to occur in the first quarter of next year. Anytime you see a new administration come in, they typically have about 12 to 14 months to make changes. So, you get an inauguration. First, they just got to get in there. Then we're really going to be watching the Senate runoff. Then any big changes they're in the pipeline, they're ready to roll. But it won't be until then that we know which trajectory we're likely to follow. There are some other risks associated with a Republican win, but I won't go into those right now. We'll wait and see. But what I do want to do is shine a light on some of the positives, because I spent a lot of time talking about some ugly negatives. Let's at least end this with some positives. We just saw a new stimulus bill pass. Okay, that is likely to support us and prop us up through the end of the year. We are seeing companies getting back to work at a rate that is encouraging. We are seeing this vaccine that's getting rolled out. At the least, it gives people peace of mind. Now, whether that's the right peace of mind or not, again, doesn't matter. It does affect the way that we're viewing the future of business and the continued recovery out of this bizarre world that we've created in this past year. In the first quarter, some of the other big influences that I think are going to be positive. There are a lot of companies who have been in talks with doing some kind of merger and acquisition. Now, again, that typically benefits the biggest companies out there. I don't love the idea that it's going on, but mergers and acquisitions are a hot topic, and here's why. They have very low rates to borrow. And again, the bigger you are, the more powerful or the more reach you have, the closer you are to the bank, the closer that bank is to the Fed, the cheaper the money gets to borrow. Well, if I'm a really big company and I've got a lot of cash on hand, but I can also borrow it for next to nothing, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm not going to go through a cash burn. I'm going to go and borrow because I can. When they borrow, what they're going to do is they're going to buy up other companies. Okay, it's very little cost. And then let's just say the company they buy up, they can split in two, sell off half and keep half. Maybe that gives them a market share in an area that they want. That's what Amazon's model is. They will buy up a company just simply to get market share in something because they can, and they're borrowing for so cheap. Okay, Chewy, the Amazon delivery food service that's turned into this, that, and the other. It's food, and then it's restaurants, and then it's grocery shopping, and I mean, whatever. They can do that. They can play with those ideas, but it just makes Amazon bigger and it makes them more profitable. Okay. But all of these deals that have been maybe in talks, I'm using big names that we would all recognize, but there's tons of them that are going on. And then there's a concept called a SPAC, which is a single property acquisition company or single position acquisition company. It's basically a hedge fund that only buys one company and then takes them public, where it's a small company that they would usually look for venture capitalists or something like that. Well, now they can get this one dedicated service team effectively that takes them public. Those and again, all the mergers and acquisitions, they've been very conscientiously sitting on the sidelines in the last quarter of this past year because they're looking at it going, if I wait and do it in 2021 and we see some kind of tax change, I'm going to benefit more from the costs associated with this because I can write them off against gains in a year where we may have higher taxes. We know for a fact what the tax code is this year, but they may get higher. Taxes may become more expensive in the coming year. I'm going to wait to do my merger and acquisition. All the while, the company being acquired, they're going, I'm okay waiting, but don't make me wait too long into the next year. I don't trust things. I want to get my money and get out of here. Okay, so that's why the first quarter likely is going to have a lot of real positive influence. There's going to be a lot of activity being taken. That in concert with, on the more kind of personal side, more likely than not, tax changes, even if they get passed, let's say the Senate goes to the Democrats and the tax bill is like, hey, here it is, boom, hits you. That's March, April, May, maybe where it actually gets hashed out. The bill gets written, it gets put through, it's passed, signed, delivered. Retroactive taxation on income, it can be done because, again, you don't report your income for the year, but it really looks bad on an administration. They don't typically do that. They will do it to estates because that's a way where very few people will actually be impacted. If they cut the estate tax exemption from the 11 million per person down to 2 even, right? It still means that a couple has to have 4 million in estate monies before it affects them. That's not a ton of people. So they're not going to irritate a lot of folks. So maybe they'll do that retroactively, but in terms of income, even if it is nobody under 400,000, there's potentially capital gains tax changes. There's potentially step up in basis changes. Those are going to hit a lot of people. They will likely not do that retroactively, meaning they pass it in June, but it applies to everything that happened from January forward. Not likely. So for that reason, we've got this first quarter of 2021 that likely has a lot of good potential. It will likely not see a big sell-off, but that to me is a window of opportunity to begin lightening our exposure, at least in domestic equities, U.S. stocks. We've been overweighted in stocks in the U.S. for a long time now. for a good reason. But truth be told, we're starting to see some indication that some of the international stock markets are benefiting right now. They're taking different measures to deal with things. Their political systems are maybe coming around full circle and realizing that some of these absurd positions and stances that they've taken over the past 5 or 10 years have been just that, absurd. And the day of reckoning may be coming. We're seeing some very positive action out of the international markets. And all of that is before we talk about the US dollar, which we won't get into, but a weak dollar is actually a benefit to every market outside, because it just means that when those countries need something from the US or whatever it is, they've got more buying power. When it comes to oil and it comes to resources that are typically under denominated by the dollar, they are able to access that dollar at a cheaper rate. So then they can go and access effectively the oil at a cheaper rate. International companies benefit when the dollar is weak, and with an inflationary environment, with the way that we're doing, it's that gold analogy I used earlier on, that idea that you put more into the system, it makes it less valuable. The US dollar is inherently going to be less valuable. So we're going to be taking a very tactful approach to not jump the gun, not skip town before the parade comes through. But as the parade's coming through, we might want to miss the traffic on the way out. We might want to leave a little bit before the end of the parade. And I'm going to be comfortable doing that. And I encourage you to be very vigilant, be mindful. Don't jump at every bad news that comes your way, because the news marketplace, they don't have Trump to be their villain that they can bark about constantly about how everything he does, he inhaled the wrong way. They don't have that anymore. They don't have the fear mongering from that tactic. What they're going to do is they're going to replace that with something else. The question is what? But more often than not, it's not going to be something valuable. It's not going to be legitimate. So I'm going to try to stay in touch with everybody the best I can. But in the meantime, I've been rattling on now for about 40 minutes. That's enough time for the holidays. Have a very Merry Christmas. Have a very Happy New Year. I look very forward to talking with you in the coming months and hopefully seeing you in the coming months. If there's anything that comes up that you're uncertain about, or you read something or see something, give me a call. Reach out to me. I'll let everybody know that in the coming year, I'm going to be having probably a new phone number, but it's going to be one that I can text back and forth with you. And it'll be compliant for me to do so. So I look forward to having that, and I'll let you all know when that comes out. But in the meantime, like I said, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and I'm looking forward to the coming year. There's going to be a lot of good things that come, and we will get through any of the bad. Best wishes, and I'll talk to you soon.